Namaskar, Jai Shri Krishna. Promulgating Text 10, Text 11 and Text 12 of Chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service of First Canto Creation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Text 10, Kamasya Nendriya Pritirlabho Jiveta Yavata Jivasya Tattva Jidnyasa Nartho Yashacheha Karmabhiha. Life's desires should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation. Since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth, nothing else should be the goal of one's works. The completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed towards the fulfillment of desires and sense gratification. In such civilization, in all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even in salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly predominant. In the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. The voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification. As soon as the voters are dissatisfied in their own sense satisfaction, they dethrone the leaders. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. The same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. One should satisfy the senses in so much as required for self-preservation and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses which also require a certain amount of satisfaction, there are regulative directions for satisfaction of such senses. But the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage or the combination of a man with a woman is necessary for progeny, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning. But foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is search after the absolute truth. Seekers of the absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements in sense gratification because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth, and that sort of engagement will make one happy because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And what that absolute truth is explained now. Text 11. Vadanti tata tattva vidasat tattvam yaja jnanamadavayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagvaniti shabdayate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahma, Paramatma or Bhagwan. The absolute truth is both subject and object, and there is no qualitative difference there. Therefore, Brahma, Paramatma and Bhagwan are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahma by the students of the Upanishads, as localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagwan by the devotees. In other words, Bhagwan or the personality of Godhead is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation of the personality of Godhead, and impersonal Brahma is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun god. Less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization, but those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features of the one absolute truth are different perspective views seen from different angles of vision. As it is explained in the first shlok of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, the supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant and free from the illusion of relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known, but in the absolute truth, both the knower and the known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower is the living spirit or superior energy, whereas the known is inert matter or inferior energy. Therefore, there is a duality of inferior and superior energy. Whereas in the absolute realm, both the knower and the known are of the same superior energy. There are three kinds of energies of the supreme energetic. There is no difference between the energy and energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The absolute realm and the living entities are of the same superior energy, but the material world is inferior energy. The living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusion, thinking he belongs to the inferior energy. Therefore, there is the sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything there is absolute. Text 12. Tacha Shradada Dhana Munayo Jnana Vairagya Yuktaya Pashayantyatmani Chatmanam Bhaktaya Shruta Gruhitaya. The seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes that absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he has heard from the Vedanta Shruti. The absolute truth is realized in full by the process of devotional service to the Lord Vasudev, or the personality of Godhead, who is the full-fledged absolute truth. Brahma is his transcendental bodily effulgence and Paramatma is his partial representation. As such, Brahma or Paramatma realization of the absolute truth is but a partial realization. There are 4 different types of human beings: the karmis, the jnanis, the yogis and the devotees. The karmis are materialistic, whereas the other 3 are transcendental. The first class transcendentalists are the devotees who have realized the Supreme Person. The second class transcendentalists are those who have partially realized the plenary portion of the Absolute Person. And the third class transcendentalists are those who have barely realized the spiritual focus of the Absolute Person. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures, the Supreme Person is realized by devotional service, which is backed by full knowledge and detachment from material association. We have already discussed the point that devotional service is followed by knowledge and detachment from material association. As Brahma and Paramatma realization are imperfect realizations of the absolute truth, so the means of realizing Brahma and Paramatma, that is the paths of Jnana and Yoga, are also imperfect means of realizing the absolute truth. Devotional service, which is based on the foreground of full knowledge combined with detachment from material association and which is fixed by the oral reception of the Vedanta Shruti, is the only perfect method by which the seriously inquisitive student can realize the absolute truth. Devotional service is not therefore meant for the less intelligent class of transcendentalists. There are 3 classes of devotees, namely first, second and third class. The third class devotees are the neophytes who have no knowledge and are not detached from material association, but who are simply attracted by the preliminary process of worshipping the deity in the temple, are called material devotees. Material devotees are more attached to material benefit than transcendental profit. Therefore, one has to make definite progress from the position of material devotional service to the second class devotional position. In the second class position, the devotee can see 4 principles in the devotional line, namely the personality of Godhead, his devotees, the ignorant and the envious. One has to raise himself at least to the stage of a second class devotee and thus become eligible to know the absolute truth. A third class devotee therefore has to receive the instructions of devotional service from the authoritative sources of Bhagavad. The number 1 Bhagavad is the established personality of devotee and the other Bhagavatam is the message of Godhead. The third class devotee therefore has to go to the personality of devotee in order to learn the instructions of devotional service. Such a personality of devotee is not a professional man who earns his livelihood by the business of Bhagavatam. Such a devotee must be a representative of Shukadeva Goswami like a Suta Goswami and must preach the cult of devotional service for the all-around benefit of all the people. A neophyte devotee have very little taste for hearing from the authorities. Such a neophyte devotee makes a show of hearing from the professional man to satisfy his senses. This sort of hearing and chanting has spoiled the whole thing, so one should be very careful about the faulty process. The holy messages of Godhead as inculcated in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Srimad Bhagavatam are undoubtedly transcendental subjects, but even though they are so, such transcendental matters are not to be received from a professional man who spoils them as the serpent spoils milk simply by the touch of his tongue. A sincere devotee must therefore be prepared to hear this Vedic literature like the Upanishads, Vedanta and other literatures left by the previous authorities or Goswamis for the benefit of his progress. Without hearing such literatures, one cannot make actual progress, and without hearing and following the instructions, the show of devotional service becomes worthless and therefore a sort of disturbance in the path of devotional service. Unless, therefore, devotional service is established on the principles of Shruti, Smriti, Puran and Pancharatra authorities, the make show of devotional service should at once be rejected. An unauthorized devotee should never be recognized as a pure devotee. By assimilation of such messages from the Vedic literatures, one can see the all-pervading, localized aspect of the personality of Godhead within his own self constantly. This is called Samadhi. Thank you.